Hi guys, hello. This is Liquid Telegon, and today I'm going to be going over some of my ideas for creating consistency inside of Phase 1 of Fyrakk. Um, Watched a lot of guilds progress this boss at this point, from the Race World First to Hoff to CE. Um, I've helped a lot of guilds in those positions as well, and obviously um, doing my own guild now in Velocity, and I implemented a lot of these stuff in the guild I was helping before, and then I carried that over here, and so far it has seemed to be very helpful, and hopefully it might help you too if you are looking to kill the boss, get CE before the time runs out, or just create consistency in your farm going forward. I think some of these ideas are pretty good, and maybe they can help you. So basically, just two ideas, which we're going to spend the time on, although they go a little bit more in depth than just the surface level. So the first one is frontal baits, right? And the assignments surrounding them and how we make that work. The second one is firestorm placement, right? And you might look at those and be like, oh, that's super easy. I'm already baiting the frontals. We're already placing the firestorms, right? But it's actually a lot more nuanced than you might first expect. So bear with me, and I think you'll be satisfied, hopefully. So most guilds with the frontal base, they just say like, okay, if you're ranged, you should bait a frontal, right? If you're near a frontal, you should bait it as well. And um, like if your players are like awesome and perfect, yeah, that maybe that can work, but usually not the case. So we're going to make a system for that and talk about how the system cascades down to be successful across different assignments and stuff like that. Um, the second point is firestorm placement. A lot of guilds don't respect firestorm placement as much as they should. In reality, it's like a large mistake to ever place a bad firestorm puddle or mythic soak puddle. And the reason for that is that because it turns what is a static strategy, right? So this whole video is going to be building upon the Echo framework for Phase 1, at least in terms of positioning, Firestorm drops, Mythic Soak drops. So that's kind of like the framework. And then uh, that whole framework is static, right? So as soon as you place a puddle which isn't within that framework, you move what was a static strategy into a dynamic one, where a dynamic problem where people need to think about where they're placing firestorms, where they're moving, like everything that they once knew what to expect, they no longer know what to expect, right? And obviously that's not good from the race to world first level all the way down to CE. Static problems are always going to be way far easier than dynamic ones, and we always want to chase the static problem that we know how to solve every time and steer clear of dynamic problems, right? And at the most basic level, Firestorm itself is a dynamic problem, right? Because you have 4 random people get the Firestorm debuffs, and depending on where they're positioned, that whole problem is very dynamic. Of like, how do these 4 people slot into these 4 spots, right? In the most effective way, right? Like how does everyone get in position? And that's what most guilds struggle with. And so I have some solutions to create consistency there as well. So let's talk about the frontal baits first. So essentially, what we're going to do is assign 4 people to be baiting frontals on every set, right? So if you just draw a line or a cross here, like a Cartesian plane 2D, 4 quadrants, right? So a quadrant A, B, C, D, right? We're assigning 4 players to 1 in each quadrant to look to bait every time, right? So you can see my assignments here. It says bait frontals in 4. That's just the normal bait frontal Bikoria. And then the second one here is go front right. So each of these 4 players, we have a warlock here, we have a mage out here, and then we have a hunter out here, right? So those are our 4 players who are looking to bait. And then um, they'll just look to bait every time. It is somewhat important what specs you choose to assign where, right? Generally, B and C can be more immobile specs, like Warlock. or other immobile range specs. A and D need to be more mobile. D is definitely a best spot for a mage. A is definitely the best spot for a hunter. And so that's something to think about. The other thing is that when it comes to the mythic soaks, you want to think about where these players are assigned, right? Basically, both of these should always be assigned left, and both of these should always be assigned right. Otherwise, it would be really weird for D to have to use all his movement to get over to the left soak when he's baiting a frontal on far over here. So something to think about as well. But generally, this just creates a lot of consistency around frontal baits because generally they do spawn out in this, like, so if you draw like a circle around this, right? Generally, a lot of the ads do spawn within this vicinity, close enough to be baited by one of these four players. That kind of moves us nicely into the rest of the logic here, where you want the melee to be pretty playing in melee, obviously, right? And then they can look to bait as well, because often ads do spawn in this like middle, like just outside of melee space, right? And very easy if the melee are aware to move away from any ad that spawns, and then one melee just looks to bait it right out away from the group, right? And that's like a high quality of life thing. Like if you see the opportunity to do it, but otherwise, these ones that spawn close to, like very close to melee, if they're going through the boss, usually they're pretty easy to dodge. The only caveat there is like if a ranged player is baiting out here, that might have to be an audible call, right? One through the boss, stuff like that. But yeah, generally easy to be baited if the melee are aware and looking to avoid baiting the ones in melee. Someone, one of the players looking to bait or another ranged out here can either get it if all the melee try to avoid it, or one of the melee can usually easily bait it out as well. Secondarily, if you are a melee, or if you are ranged with little mobility, you're generally looking to play like just outside of melee, right? And if you're arranged with a decent amount of mobility and you're not one of the four assigned players, which is pretty rare because don't have many players with that much mobility. But if you happen to be playing out in this like middle ranged area to just avoid cramping with blades, right? You also need to be looking to bait, right? And then if like it like if it spawns near a player assigned to bait, just let them have it, right? If it spawns on another player that's not you, just let them have it, right? Super easy dynamic to satisfy there. And then just a general like micro with the baits. If it ever spawns behind you, walking directly at it is always wrong. Unless you're like right in front of it, then you can walk directly through it. But if you're anywhere farther than being able to walk directly through it, walking directly at it is always wrong because you're going to bait it into the group, and this is a mistake I see a lot of people make. Always to the side here, and just creates way better, more consistent baits, right? So yeah, general dynamic. We have those four assignments, four players, and then you're always just drawing this cross on the boss like this, right? Wherever he is in the room, you're drawing the cross, and then you're looking to bait in your quadrant. All good. Something that happens consistently, like here, right, is depending on where you've moved the boss at this point, you may want to consider moving the boss more here. This is something I've told them they've started doing recently. Is depending on like how quickly you move the boss across, and when he casts these frontals, you would rather the boss be here when he casts the frontals, sorry. So you can draw this nice plane, and then you leave a lot of space here for an ad to spawn here and be easily baited by the player that is moving there, right? Same with over here. The problem with the current boss positioning is if he was casting the frontals later, right? So it's not a problem in this instance, because the boss was like here where he cast it. Although you would prefer he's like here, right? The basic idea here is just you want to leave space for ads to spawn here and be easily baited without making the melee like make him undo movement. So at this point, right, the mythic soaks are going to be here. melee want to be on the side of the boss already, and that makes like if an ad was to spawn like close to the fire here, that makes it kind of weird for them. So that makes them places the burden on them to play better. So just move the boss a little out here, right? And we create a nice dynamic here with the cross, and it leaves a lot of space for an ad to spawn here and be baited. Same with over here. And then, yeah, so just a general rule is always, if you're not one of the assigned players to bait, look to help, not hurt, right? So no running directly at, no trying to steal it from the baiting player. If you're melee, trying to stay close into melee and avoid baiting unless you think you can get it away from the group very easily, right? So like this is an example of one which, if there was no range player here, a melee could easily step out like towards this direction and bait it super well. So it's really just being aware and doing your best to help, not hurt with the Firestorm baits, or not Firestorm baits, frontal baits, right? And yeah, so for us that created a lot of consistency with those. Um, as long as the baiters are playing well and like people are aware, it is very consistent. So let's move on to the Firestorm stuff here. And this is the stuff that like really makes a big difference as well. So like the frontal baits are like nice, but if you're already playing like pretty aware and well with the frontals, like you can do it without the assignments. I just think the assignments like make it a lot more consistent. But with the Firestorm things, like I don't think any of this is really optional, and I don't think there's much of an argument here for not doing it this way. So if we just draw a line like this here, and then we're going to mark our Firestorm spots. Right, you can see there are already markers there. If melee are ever on this crossed like shaded side of the boss, right, then they're making a massive mistake. And the reason for that is because as he casts Firestorms, right, the debuffs go out, a bunch of swirlies spawn here, right? And anyone who is on this side of the boss now has to run through the swirlies, which you cannot do, you will die, or run around, right? Let's switch the pen color here. Or run around, right? Which is like weird for two reasons. So if you're running around, you have a long distance to go. So if you're just natty running, even with like a slight movement effect, you can like barely make it from here to here in time. And that's a weird dynamic because the ranged are already pre-positioned at the two outermost spots, right? Because that's easiest for them. The baiters went in right here, and they're not going to like intuitively, like it places a big burden on them to like see melee coming in right from over all the way over here and be like, okay, I'm gonna move this way because they're trying to cast, and it's like it's like they need to make a selfless play to like accommodate you for being out of position, and you used a movement you used some movement spell to like even get here in the first place, right? um and all that is just like super easily preventable by playing correctly. So consider now that you're on the correct side of the boss right here, right? We can just draw a line to like show how much of a difference it is, right? We can draw a line from each of these spots to the like place that you should play, and now like a line to like where you are. It's like double distance, right? And then take into the fact that you can't run through because of the swirlies, right? Double or like double and a half distance, right? And it's literally for no reason, right? So this dynamic creates a lot of inconsistency. You can pull up like almost any Fyrakk VOD and you'll see melee playing on the side of the boss. They get Firestorm and they fail to get to the spot in time, or they create a lot of problems. They double drop on top of people's heads, right? Bunch of things can happen and go wrong, and it's really bad for consistency, right? And it's literally fixed by just moving your melee from this side of the boss to this side of the boss, right? Um, so that's like the main idea, and then there are a bunch of there's a bunch of further like ideas and logic that kind of cascade down from this like thought process. So with that being said, um, you want melee on the side of the boss, right? Just makes Firestorm way easier. But now, um, in my opinion, there's a very easy way to like facilitate this, right? Melee are, I'm gonna use a metaphor, right? So melee are like sheep. They will pretty much move wherever the boss moves, um, under penalty of death, right? Like they would rather die than not be hitting the boss most of the time, and then they also would rather die than get parried, right? So they're always going to try and play behind the boss. So one really easy way to address this dynamic of like melee positioning correctly, um, is just facing the boss away from where you want them to play, right? So if you face the boss towards the tree, then they will just congregate on the back of the boss, right, which puts them in the correct position for firestorms. And you can kind of extend this idea out into other parts of the fight as well, specifically Dream Rend, just like a small tangent here. But something else that I see quite often, even I think we have problems with it if we look here. See if we can find a good example. And so this is after I've yelled at them quite a bit. See if we can go back here. And so this is all decent. Let's see. Trying to find an example of like really egregious movement. Yeah, alright. Yeah, I don't have any. So let's just go back to the good example. So essentially, you're just looking here, right? What I see a lot with a lot of guilds is them, like tanks positioning the boss like basically here, right? And melee want to be behind it, right? So they're just chilling on the back of the boss, and these orbs are just coming in, bro, and they're so close, right? And this causes like unironically like a lot of wipes. But if melee, if the tanks just like think about this fact, and pull the boss a little bit more aggressively, because you have a lot of room here, right? Like you can move all the way up here, like during the Dream Run time, and it's completely fine, right? If you just create this space for melee with the boss movement, you'll never die to orbs, right? And then it's up to people trolling, like going close to the Dream Rend here, like ranged, like that I want to cast, to like make the orbs be baited badly, right? So like most of the problems that people have with Dream Rend can just be solved with tank positioning, as long as you have like the required movement speed effects active, right? And it's literally the same if we go back to the firestorms. Go back to a good example here of the firestorms. Yeah, this is the one I want. Okay. So we need the melee to be pre-positioned, right? At this point, I've chastised them a lot for playing on the wrong side of the boss, right? And then obviously, if you're a high mobility spec, like it's okay for you to play on the side of the boss, right? It's a little weird because like the way the swirlies work, right? If we just like watch it play, all the swirlies are pretty much baited on players, right? So if all the melee are like here, right, before the firestorm goes out, then all the swirls are baited here. The people with the firestorms just go into the spots, and then the people without just move to the side of the boss, which is like completely clear of swirlies, basically, right? And that is like a really good dynamic to maintain. But either way, uh, if you're warrior or like DH and you're playing on this side of the boss, it's okay. The only caveat there is like you do want to be using instant movement effects as soon as the firestorms come out, to create the easiest problem for the other players to solve, right? And I'll kind of explain this a bit more because I don't think it's super intuitive. So if we're looking at the available Firestorm spots here, right? Those are the 4 spots we have, right? And our melee are on the quick side of the boss, and we can see where the circles are. So Pat is a mage, and he's out here, right? And he gets Firestorm. He was doing his bait, so he's not out of position here. Everyone else is pretty much in position. You can see some range players over here, kind of leaning towards what is like a soft range position here, right? You can see Rav and I, Bond, Preservation Evoker leaning towards this second range spot, right? And that's kind of like a dynamic that you want to maintain. So if you're thinking about it again, if range pre-position in the hardest spots for melee to get to, right? Because the boss is exactly in the middle of all these 4 spots. Melee should be pre-positioning here, right? What are the easiest spots for melee to get to? It's these 2, right? Melee 1, melee 2, right? These are definitely the easiest spots for melee. And then range can easily pre-position on these 2 spots, especially for the baiters here, right? So like I'm a ranged hunter, I was just baiting here, right? I can easily, after I'm done baiting, walk towards here. Rav was already baiting here. He's like already in position to bait basically, right? So you can create super clean dynamics of what people have done previously and where they go next, right? This healing priest just finished running from the dream rend and then frontal baits, right? So he is probably just chilling, healing here the whole time after the dream rend, and he's positioned neatly so he can just walk basically like 5 to 10 yards and get exactly in position, right? Same thing with this disc priest. He can reach easily either of these 2 spots, 5 to 10 yards, 1 feather, and then super easy, right? Now the point at which this problem becomes difficult in this configuration, right, is okay. So none of the ranged people over here got the Firestorm, right? So how you want to think about abilities like this, right? So it's a private Aurea. You just have to actually play the game and figure it out, right? So like in your head, how do you approach mechanics like these? And in my opinion, the answer is that you're trying to look at it holistically as possible, or as holistically as possible, and then you have some tenets that follow that create consistency. So the 4 debuffs would go out. You're already in these positions, right? Melee is baiting here. Range is like pre-positioned on the sides. So not really a bait, it's more of a pre-position. So melee is pre-positioned in the middle on the close side of the boss. Range is pre-positioned on the sides on the close side of the boss, right? And that's kind of like the most set up for success that you could be, right? Because the firestorms are going to be random. They're going to go on random people, usually with a 1 to 3 or 2 to 2 spread from to melee and ranged, right? So you get the firestorm, you're looking top down, and it's basically just pattern matching, right? You're looking at the circles as a pattern, and you're looking at the places you could go as a pattern, right? So you have these 4 circles, right? And then you have these 4 circles, right? And your like snap decision making is like, how do these 4 circles get into these 4 circles, right? Super easy, like game theory game. And the way that you create consistency with this problem, and this is like an example where it's like not super obvious, right? Because you see like 4 pretty overlapped circles. So there's 2 answers to how you create consistency. One is communication. Whatever you're going to do to create the consistency or solve the problem, you need to communicate it to the other 3 players because they are also thinking like, how do I make this work, right? Or they should be thinking, how do I make this work? And not just trying to get to the easiest position possible, right? Because if everyone moves only to the easiest position possible, then this is hard, right? Because these 3 players, like one of these slots is all, let me make this drawing less cringe. Hold on. All right. So, these basically all 3 of these players are closest to these 3, right? Like you could maybe closest to Pat is really closest to this one, but this is close enough that you could go there, right? Especially with Blink, right? And this kind of is just this graphic shows you what is the solution, right? No one, it is not obvious who should go here, right? If you make it obvious who should go here instantly, the rest of this problem is trivial, right? Because everyone can go pretty much to the closest position or run towards the closest position and then figure it out, right? So we're communicating about what we're going to do. And then secondarily, we're removing the hardest option early. And this is like what makes what creates consistency about the pre-positioning is like, say if Pat did not get Firestorm, right, and I got Firestorm, it solves the problem in the same way. This spot is gone, right? It's solved. We only have these three spots to go to, and it's very obvious. Like this guy doesn't exist, right? Preheat goes to this one. He can use his hover to get there instantly, and then that tells these two people, right, exactly where they need to go because they're already closest to the same ones, right? And they have more than enough time to figure that out. Alternatively, this guy can run to this one, Preheat can adapt, hover to this one, and this guy runs to this one, right? And it's like that is all predicated on the idea that this spot is taken, right? So if you remove the hardest option, generally the problem becomes much easier. So if you're a player with a blink, with a leap, with any sort of like instant movement effect or a fast movement effect, or if you're ranged and you're pre-positioned, all of those things makes the problem easier, right? If you are to get Firestorm and you remove an option from the table, right? So like this is a problem with we have we have 4 slots, 4 holes, right? If you just instantly remove one, make it 3, the problem becomes way easier, right? And the only problem with that is like sometimes people take it too far, right? Where if a range positions like in a bad spot, like if a range takes one of these, right, and they refuse to move, that makes this problem harder. Um, Generally, if you take a position and refuse to adapt at all, that's also bad, right? Because sometimes other people make mistakes, and if you just adapted, you could still solve the problem, right? So that's something to be aware of as well. But just generally, let's continue looking at this scenario that we have in front of us. So now going back to this one, right? So how do we make this one easier? We've already kind of talked about it. If the mage just blinks this way, right? And we're going to watch him blink incorrectly and make this harder. But if he just blinks here, right, removes this position, then it's super easy for everyone, right? And now we're going to actually watch what happens. Just one more thing before we do. So the theory here is if the problem isn't super clear, like the debus go out and it's not clear immediately where everyone should go, the highest agency player, looks to remove the worst spot, right? So in this scenario, this is clearly the worst spot, right? The farthest from everyone, right? No one, it's not clear who should go to this spot, right? Just by looking at the circles, right? It becomes clear if you begin to look at the classes and specs who have gotten the circles, right? But you don't really have enough time for that. So the highest agency player removes the worst position, right? And in that case, we'll see what actually happened. Right, that it's kind of fast there. So we're gonna watch Pat blink, right? So he blinks from here directly in here, right? And this is a really bad move for consistency, right? Because you have three lower mobility players already here, right? So just like in this instance, like this is just after his blink, right? Imagine a world where he is here instead of here, right? It's like exceedingly obvious where everyone is going to go, right? Like there's no world where these people don't go to these 3 spots if he blinks here, right? It's impossible to mess up. You have 2 more seconds. In this scenario, you're creating inconsistency because someone else has to play better, right? Someone else has to make a better decision, and that's what this blink forces, right? So he after he blinks, something really good happens. Like Teddy, who has Firestorm here, realizes the pattern, right? So he sees one, two circles overlapping, one here. Looking at the spots again, there's only one place where he can go, and this still works, right? So he audibles, I'm going far, right? And with the 2 seconds remaining, all the other players immediately know what needs to happen, right? Preheat needs to go here, Pat needs to go here, Fade XD needs to go here, right? So what was initially a very simple problem, if Pat just blinks here, becomes a more difficult one where this player has a large burden placed on him where he has to not only use his mobility, so he needs to what he did not need to sprint before, and now he needs to use sprint, so we're costing him a mobility cooldown. The blink was used either way. um, so Teddy loses his mobility, and he also has the burden of needing to audible what he's doing, right, to kind of like solve this scenario and fix it, because if he didn't audible, it's possible that these players may have become more confused and not filled in correctly, right? It's possible that Pat might have used another blink charge um, to get over here because he thought that that was the only way to fix it, right? Um, and him audibling is like a pivotal part of solving this scenario, and that's something you should always keep in mind. Uh, Communication is key to creating consistency with private order mechanics, right? So with the Mythic Soaks, with Firestorms, with literally almost anything, if you just say what you're doing instantly, you can make a situation where you need to like read each other's minds to solve the mechanic just trivially easy, right? What happens a lot with Mythic Soaks is two of the circles are on top of each other, and they're not sure which one should go middle, or all three soaks are pretty close to each other. No one's sure who should go far, right? If you just speak instantly, say far, right, middle, then everyone knows exactly what's going on instantly, right? There's no chance of failure almost, and that's like a really important thing that you should take forward when it comes to creating consistency, right? So Teddy makes an insane play here and does that audible, and that just makes this situation far easier for everyone else. Um, but like if we put this situation at like a 7 of difficulty, right? Because it required audible communication, it required the use of a movement cooldown that wasn't prepared to be used, or shouldn't have been necessarily used, right? Um, if Pat had just blinked here, this situation becomes like a 1, right? So you're like carrying this forward into every situation like this, and this is even with people like pre-positioned correctly for the mechanic. This is just how much of a difference the use of instant mobility can be on like these type of mechanics, right? If you remove the hardest option like instantly or early on in the like problem solving process, the problem usually just becomes like infinitely easier, right? And that's something that you should definitely think about almost constantly, especially in the world of private auras. Just like, and especially in a fight like Fyrakk, right? Like, what percentage of P1 wipes do you have compared to P3, right? Um, this fight is all about getting to P3. And the more consistency you have in phase 1, the less pulls you're going to have, right? The quicker you're going to kill the boss. And this has been true for most of the fights in this expansion, right? If you're looking at Razageth, like the less times you're in P1, the more times you're gonna the more quickly you're gonna kill the boss, right? Um, Jailer with bombs, Sarkreth, it's like pretty much every fight is just like how little time and how much consistency can we have in phase 1, right? Because usually they're pretty challenging, and it's like just like a check, like can you do this consistently enough to kill the boss, right? Because at least on Fyrakk. Phase 2 is like pretty chill, like a big step down in difficulty from phase 1 intermission, and then phase 3 is like its own progression point. It's super easy now, but um, earlier on, like when you're at the Hoff level or higher, uh, you needed to get those reps in P3, right? Like you needed these people with the seeds to be able to play with the seeds. And every wipe you have in phase 1 is like taking time away from those players, like learning the fight, right? So that's kind of the rant and the spiel. Um, Personally, I think the Firestorm bit is like a really important thing, and um, definitely like something that a lot of players should look to internalize and think more about. The frontal baits are mostly just a nice thing that I think creates consistency, but definitely the whole Firestorm topic I think is really really important, and like abilities like that and how you think about them, um, it's very very important. Uh, and also with the tank positioning, um, I think that's also something that's quite rare. So those are kind of like the main takeaways I think you should get out of this video. Um, and hopefully my ranting wasn't too cringe. Hopefully you agree with me. If you don't, that's all good. Love you guys. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you later.